Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Daniel chapter 5. So, in this, as we're moving on, let me show you why I have this screen up here because we're getting close to. We're going to break this down in detail. This was an image, and we talked about this image in Daniel chapter 2. This was given to Nebuchadnezzar. It is a prophetic uh, time frame of the world kingdoms to the until the end of the age of when Jesus comes. We'll get to this later. We're going to break this down. But why I want to show you this here is because as we get into chapter 5, we see that the image that Nebuchadnezzar was given was of human governments that rule the world, these empires that rule the world. Babylon, and God gave it to Nebuchadnezzar. I think it was the first year of his reign. So we see that he was the head of gold. And then if you look at, maybe, I don't know if you can see the dating here of this. The Babylon reigned from somewhere around the neighborhood of 605 BC to 539 BC. And then you they were later conquered by the Mede and Persian kingdom. Now, and then later the Grecian kingdom, here by Alexander the Great. And then you come to the Roman kingdom, which brings us to the time of the early church, okay? The early church. But as you can see, they seem to have the longest rulership from about 168 AD to about 476 AD. I'm sorry, 176 BC to 476 AD. So somewhere almost close to 600 years. Now, um, one of the things about prophecy I think is very important because as we're reading and studying the book of Daniel, Daniel is in two parts. The first 6 chapters spans pretty much Daniel's life. He was deported to Babylon at an early age, probably around he was a teenager. And then as we get into now chapter 5, we're going to see a transition as he's going to go from the Babylonian kingdom into the Mede and Persian kingdom. Okay? And then we'll get into the rest of those kingdoms when we get into chapter 7. Now, his book, by the way, is a kind of an explanation. Daniel, especially from chapters 7 to 12, is basically explaining, interpreting this dream in further detail. Okay? So with that, let's get to it. As I said, it is a fascinating book. Excuse me. All right. So Daniel chapter 5. Now, in chapter 4, we pretty much saw, we kind of we saw sort of the end of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar being, you could, according to God, really the greatest kingdom. But he was also, as kings are, dictators are, he was very prideful and God humbled him. And if you remember, God had told him, look, you better straighten your ways up or God is going to drive you mad. And that's what happened to him. Um, we might say it's a form of insanity where he kind of lived like an animal, act like an animal. He lost his mind for about, I don't know, about it was 7 seasons. So about maybe 2.5 years, something like that. I don't know how you want to. interpret I think it's 7 periods. So 7 periods, a little over, well, under a year, right? So four. Some people think the periods represented the seasons. So 4 seasons. So yeah, just a little close to 2 years. Okay. So here we're going to see his grandson. All right. Now some people think of his son, but his grandson. Um, so the kingdom has already passed from Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar, which is, as we will see, most scholars will agree that it is his grandson. So it says here, first one, King Belshazzar held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine in their presence. Under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar gave orders to bring in the gold and silver vessels that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, wives, and concubines could drink from them. So they brought in the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. Now, and the king and his nobles, wives, concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised their gods made of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So they had this great festival. Notice he says what, thousands of his nobles. So this is a big bash, big kind of thing. And by the way, you see the amount of jewelry. I mean, not jewelry, but the vessels that Solomon had made. And when they had destroyed the temple, they brought all of these uh, vessels, these gold vessels, and they put them in their temples. And now he's saying, bring them out. We're going to drink from them. And then it says, so as they're having this kind of drunken engagement and probably other stuff probably going on, verse 5, at that moment, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and began writing on the plaster of the king's palace wall next to the lampstand. As the king watched the hand that was writing, his face turned pale, and his thoughts so terrified him that his hip joints shook and his knees knocked together. Now, this is some fright here. This man was seized with terror. The king called out to bring the mediums, Chaldeans, and astrologers. He said to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this inscription and gives me the interpretations will be clothed with purple and have a gold chain around his neck and have the third highest position in the kingdom. Now, I'm always amazed. Now, think about this now, because Daniel's going to come and rebuke him. And one of the things he's going to say to him is that, but you knew all of this. And I'm saying this to add, out of all of this, Daniel was about, why not call Daniel first? And it always kind of shows you the sinful nature of man. How that we just never change. And here he calls, notice the first uh, uh, group that he calls are the people who cannot, they're fakes, first of all of his magicians and his astrologers, they're fakes, the mediums, they're fakes. They just spew out stuff. Even to this very day, these so-called mediums today, they're fakes. Verse 8 says, so all the king's wise men came in, but none can read the inscription or make its interpretation known to him. Then King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face turned pale, and his nobles were bewildered. Because of the outcry of the king and his nobles, because of the outcry of the king and his nobles, the queen came to the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Don't let your thoughts terrify you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the days of your predecessor, he was found to have insights, intelligence, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods. Your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the diviners, mediums, Chaldeans, and astrologers. Your own predecessors, King, your own predecessor, the king, did this because Daniel, the one the king named Belteshazzar, was found to have an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and perception, and the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems. Therefore, summon Daniel, and he will give the king his interpretation. Now, that's it. Why did they call him? Why wasn't this the first man to call? Anyway, verse 13. Then Daniel was brought before the king. The king said to him, "Are you, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles that my predecessor, the king, brought from Judea? From Judah? I've heard that you have a spirit of the gods in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and extraordinary wisdom. Now, the wise men and mediums were brought before me to read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me, but they cannot give me the interpretation. However, I have heard about you that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Therefore, if you can read this inscription and give me its interpretation, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain around your neck and have the third highest position in the kingdom." Verse 17, then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts and give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription for the king and make the interpretation known to him." Now, of course, Daniel could interpret because God was the one giving Daniel the interpretation, because God was the one who gave the writing. Now, keep this in mind. Everyone kind of, at least the king, saw this hand write. Like, you see this hand kind of appear and just start writing. Verse 18 says, "Your Majesty, the Most High God gave sovereignty, greatness, glory, and majesty to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar." Now, let me just say this. I'm reading from the Holman Christian Standard Translation. And so if you're reading from, hold on, let me just see, I'll tell you in a moment. If you are reading from, let me go to, let's just say, the New King James, okay? So in the New King James it says, "There is a man in your kingdom." I'm reading from verse 11. He said, "There is a man in your kingdom in whom the Spirit of the Holy is a holy God, and in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom." Now, I say that only because in the New King James, referred to his father. Here, they use the term predecessors. Like I say, I will let the scholars duke that out. So, for example, why the translators of the Holman Christian Standard use the term predecessor as opposed to like I say, other translations as well, but the New King James says your father, okay, the king. And then, as I said, when it says your father, then there are also those who will say grandfather. So there's a lot of scholarly stuff here that is going on. And like I say, I'll let the scholars wrestle that out, because in order for me to be able to answer that, I would have to be able to understand the Greek. Okay? The Hebrew language. So he says, because of the greatness he gave him, all peoples, nations, language were terrified and feared him. He killed anyone he wanted and kept alive anyone he wanted. He exalted anyone he wanted and humbled anyone he wanted. But when his heart was exalted and his spirit became arrogant, we saw this in the last chapter, he was disposed from his royal throne and his glory was taken from him. He was driven away from people, and his mind was like an animal, and he lived with the wild donkeys, and he was fed grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew from the sky until he acknowledged that the Most High God is the ruler over the kingdoms of men, and he sets anyone he wants over it. But you, his successor, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. So he knew this. You know this. He says, instead, you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven. The vessels from his house were brought to you, and as you and your nobles, wives, concubines drank wine from them, you praised the God made of silver and gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or understand. But you have not glorified the God who holds breath, your life breath in his hand, and who controls the course of your life. Therefore, he sent the hand, and this writing was inscribed. Now, this statement, I think, is again very important here, because oftentimes in our world we don't see this, right? As I said, there's a belief out there called deism, that God kind of made everything and then took a hike. I'll see you later, I'll be back. What we see here is that God is very much in control. That God is very much, the kingdoms of this world are very much so being ruled by God, directed by God, and controlled by God. And this is what Daniel's rebuke is to Belshazzar, is that you fail to acknowledge the God who holds your life in his hands. Verse 25. This is the writing that was inscribed, men, Tinko, Parson. This is the interpretation of the message. Men means that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tinko means that you have been weighed in the balance and been found deficient. Pers means that your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Wow, right? Now, let's think about here. This is what God, in his sovereignty, decided, this is what I'm going to do to you, Belshazzar. Your kingdom has come to an end. Verse 29, then Belshazzar gave an order, and they clothed Daniel in purple and placed a gold chain around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him, that he should be a third ruler in the kingdom. Now, what kind of promotion do you think this was worth? In other words, God had just told him your kingdom's coming to an end. So all of that means nothing. If any of you ever worked for a factory, a company, and they gave you a promotion and you knew that 6 months later the company was going to close, or the factory was going to close or move out. He said, verse 30, that very night Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of 62. So now we see the kingdom being passed over now from the Babylonian and the Chaldeans to the Medes and the Persian. And so I will close out with my picture again. So we see now from the Babylonian kingdom, from the Babylonian kingdom, we're now into the Persian kingdom, the Medes and the Persian kingdom. So already, again, Daniel, this prophecy from the perspective of Daniel is coming to pass. The Babylonian kingdom has now passed because it was conquered, and what's amazing that it was conquered in one night. So that's kind of the amazing thing, that it was conquered in one night. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to VP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.